Good morning or afternoon where you are. I'm Michael Lynch. I'm the CEO of CHONEX. And CHONEX is a soil health company that's developing a platform to help farmers be smarter with their nutrient management. And we have some really great folks that are partnering with us and on our team that'll be leading the call today. And so I wanted to introduce Jack Washburn. Jack is the CEO of Cultra. It's an amazing soil health AI company that are helping farmers management their nutrient management plans, their soil plans, their crop plans, and he has some really, really cool stuff he's going to share with y'all about how he can use this technology to help make the process to get all the federal money that's available through NRCS and EQIP available. We have Jack Stansell. Jack has an amazing fertigation company. He's headquartered down in Dothan, Alabama, and is really doing some amazing work. We have Sam Gray, who is our operations manager here at CHONEX, and Michael Piscata, who is an agronomy consultant who will be leading the call for us. And just wanted to briefly introduce you to the team and let Michael kind of take it from here. Michael, really appreciate you running the call.
Thank you so much, Michael Lynch. Start with Sam. Sam wanted to go ahead and jump in.
Yeah, so looking at the participant, I'm assuming most everybody on here knows what CHONEX is, so I'll do a quick run through. But we transform agricultural byproducts into a biologically active crop input that enhances plant resilience, soil health, and yield. It's scientifically proven. Over the past couple of years, we have about 450 trials across a bunch of different crops. And have about a 75% win rate, and it's affordably priced for farmers. So depending on the application amounts, crops, and how much you want to put out, it can be anywhere between $10 to $20 per acre, and it's easy to use on the farm. And Laura, you can go to the next slide. And so for anybody who doesn't know, we take chicken laying hen manure at a cow main facility down near Mobile, and we use black soldier fly larvae to basically concentrate the biology and remove pathogens in that manure, and are able to take the beneficial microbes, the peptides, and the chitin derivatives in the black soldier fly larva to then compost and dehydrate and convert that material into a water dissolvable granule that, like I mentioned earlier, can be applied in multiple different ways through multiple different, sprayers, drip irrigation, overhead irrigation, to give a lot of different benefits to crops that, have our product has direct pathogen suppression and also an induced systemic resistance that we activate in plants to give a lot of benefits to plant and soil health and increase yields.
My name is Jack Washburn, I'm the CEO of Cultra. We built a nutrient management software because of all of the new testing that's coming onto the market, things like soil health assessments, plant sap analysis. There's just an increase in the amount of testing that's being done across the industry. And all of those tests are coming from, oftentimes different labs and in different formats. And we built a tool that helps us organize and manage and analyze all of that data so we can write nutrient management plans with an understanding of what is needed for our operation within the operations context. So tracking nutrients from being present in the soil to being made available through soil biology to being uptaken in the plant through testing with things like plant sap analysis and tissue tests, and being able to overlay all of that data on top of each other to figure out where your bottlenecks are. Laura, you can go to the next slide. And so we can do things like overlaying our soil analysis with our tissue analysis to track uptake trends. So we know when we're writing a management plan if we need to add more nutrients to the soil or just make those nutrients more available using products like CHONEX and biological products. And then tracking that efficacy through increased, plant testing through tissue and plant sap analysis, tracking did those nutrients get taken up into the plant once they were made more available. And all of this is to increase the organizational needs for writing these EQIP management plans. And so having really clean, accessible data in an easy way is why we built this software.
Hello, everybody. My name is Jackson Stansell. I'm the founder and CEO of Sentinel Ag. I go by Jack most times, but you can call me Jackson to kind of keep Jack Washburn and I separate during the call today. Um, the Sentinel platform basically allows you to end the guesswork with nitrogen management by combining your crop's reflectance with your soil data and other agronomically important data layers to help you determine the optimal timing, rate, and placement for nitrogen in your fields. This technology was built through my master's research in ag engineering at the University of Nebraska on farm. And we have learned through those on farm trials that this technology can improve profit by $22 an acre and improve nitrogen use efficiency by 23%. The way that the technology works is we ingest image data, primarily from satellites, combine that with weather, operations, and other agronomically important data layers to produce insights that isolate the impact of nitrogen on crop performance and allow us to both measure and forecast nitrogen sufficiency and nitrogen demand. And ultimately, we distill this down into recommendations that are stoplight simple for agronomists and growers to use. It can be as simple as either you need to apply more nitrogen or you do not need to apply more nitrogen, or it can be as complex as a variable rate prescription to get the right rates in the right places in the field. Some of the key advantages of our system is that we don't use yield goals. We don't require soil samples. We don't require nitrogen credits. And this is a no labor system. We do believe that it gives you hybrid and variety specificity and that we can see demand before it's visible to the naked eye. So all those are key advantages of our system. As far as how it works, Lauren, if you'll go to the next slide here, we really believe that nitrogen is a system approach, and it does require a good bit of intensity and thought throughout the year. We believe that everything starts with having some sort of plan in place. We do offer some tools that allow you to build and assess your nitrogen program, specifically our all-in planner. We also believe that calling audibles is really important during the year because you never know what the year is going to throw at you. So we do offer our in-time insights and our hydroflow insights, as well as our all-in advisor to help you understand what nitrogen is doing during the year and allow you to adapt to those changes in the environment with your crops in your fields. Ultimately, we allow you to execute on those prescribed applications and ultimately quantify the impact that your decisions made on crop performance. And we think that aligns pretty well with the use of alternative inputs and functional soil practices and the changes that those can induce within your systems for the benefit of your systems. So that's what we do at Sentinel. We're all about helping you make decisions that win seasons. And I'm excited to share more about that with you today.
That's excellent. We might call this, the agronomy hot take kind of portion of what we're going to discuss. We're so thankful for Jack Washburn and Jackson Stansell to be on here with us. We got Sam Gray also. Sam Gray is a part of CHONEX's team, but also he's a farmer. So we're going to have a real farm kind of perspective that we can share in light of some of these kind of topics that we're going to get into. And so I have kind of set up things for Jackson and Jack to kind of give them some lead in, and some of them Jackson's already kind of let in a little bit, so we'll start things with him. But this is for Jack and Jackson. Both of these kind of topics, or all four of these topics that we're going to kind of address. And while we're asking these topics is a big kind of question. We jumped in with this with the thought that more growers are going to be, at least we've heard about it in the past week, more growers are asking questions about USDA NRCS and what are EQIP, what are CSP, what are 590 nutrient management plans. And a lot more growers are starting to say, well, what's it going to take for me to have this hurdle solved for me? And so we have two technology accelerator companies that are with us today that I feel like are well positioned to help growers understand those hurdles and help them get to a better outcome with their own nutrient management efficiency objectives. And so the two kind of questions, so I'm prompting Jackson and Jack, we're going to try to stick to 6 to 7 minutes per topic. And what I would like to do is give the guys the lens that, how there's two ways to look at these kind of topics. Number one, you can say, how does my solution affect this topic? Or how does it impact this topic? Or also look at it through the lens of being a thought leader. What do you think is coming on the near front, especially with this news of $700 million through USDA? How do you think this could impact what growers will do? So really, there's twofold: your company as well as your own personal thoughts. And so with that, I'm going to first of all prompt this first topic. This first topic is decision support at scale. Okay. So what does it mean to have decision support at scale? And what does it mean to have lower touch points for growers and farmers? Okay. So I'm teeing that up for Jack Stansell first. And then Jack, when you finish, I'll turn it over to Jack Washburn.
Thanks, Michael. Yeah, decision support at scale is really hard. And if you think about $700 million coming into the EQIP program and the demand that really should create for agronomists that need to complete all the requirements for EQIP 590, there's going to be even more pressure and more demands on already stretched thin agronomists out there. Decision support at scale is really difficult because good decision support requires calibration. It requires data. It requires field specific knowledge, right? And gathering all of that data can be really challenging at times. So I think the onus is on us as technology providers to figure out how to provide really good decisions while minimizing the amount of data that has to come into the systems to only the absolute critical pieces of data to make those decisions. And that's something that we've really strived to do at Sentinel Ag by using some dynamic calibration techniques. So that's what we're focused on. I'm very curious to hear what Jack Washburn's takes are on this, as he's the one who's helping to facilitate nutrient management plan build out as well.
Definitely. Thanks, Jackson. Yeah, one thing, if you look at all of the EQIP management plan requirements, they all require very high amounts of data organization. So you can pull it all back from the 4 Rs. So knowing and having written down and easily accessible data for your operation, whether you're an agronomist or a grower, on what was applied, when it was applied, where it was applied, and what the rate was, based on, and then why you made that decision. And a lot of that comes down to things from land-grant universities. So land-grant universities come up with these recommendations per crop, and a lot of these EQIP pull from that knowledge center. And oftentimes what they're doing is they're looking at your soil tests and they're comparing it to what the land-grant university says your rates should be. And if you follow those and you put that in a plan, it's generally going to be accepted by the NRCS. But what we find is there are key difficulties in having that data organized. The most common thing I see is a lack of organization on where soil test was taken, either by alternating field names, like changing field names season by season, or if you're switching retailers, something like that, maybe they're changing the field names on you, and that makes it really hard to have consistent data organization. And so having that top of mind, knowing that when we're going into writing out these recommendations and writing these nutrient management plans, just understanding, like, taking it all back to the 4 Rs and making sure they're all consistent in your data, and that data is easily accessible. And so when we're looking at something like a Georgia nutrient management plan, right, the key things they're looking at is, what is your soil test saying for the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium, and what are you doing based on those results? And so if for example, in Georgia, the phosphorus risk index is a very heavily weighted aspect of a plan. And if your phosphorus levels are really high and your field is on a slope close to a body of water, they're going to flag that and look at that. So understanding your specific area and where some of those problems may occur, or those situations, is really important in writing these plans and having all of that documented and easily accessible. A note on the 700 million regenerative pilot program. My thoughts, and I'm not too sure exactly what it'll be, but I know that they're going to look at practices and they're going to look at outcomes. Practices is looking at, what did you do? What do you plan on doing? and having all of those details well written out and on your computer, however you're organizing that data and making sure that's organized. So that's like cover cropping and tillage and kind of those standard soil health practices we've been hearing about for a long time. Outcomes is where I think it's a little different. We're looking at all these new tests that are measuring soil health. So it's like, what are they measuring when we're looking at that, right? We're seeing new indicators come up like soil respiration rates or, things that are not just soil organic matter, like your water extractable organic carbon levels and things like that, things that directly support nutrient availability and increase the biological function of a soil. And I believe that being able to prove to an NRCS agent that that number has gone up over time will be very helpful to accessing these funds. And that means that if you take a soil health assessment test in one area and then you take it again a year later, can you draw a line going up? And that's why we built Cultra to make doing that super, super easy. And you can take a screenshot of that graph, make that graph, put it right in a management plan. So you can show an NRCS agent that this outcome was met. And that's kind of my thought on where this kind of 700 million is going to go to and how we can best position growers to be able to access that.
Yeah, I was going to give Jackson a chance to kind of elaborate and respond to some of the points that Jack just made.
Yeah, I think there are two things in there that I want to build off of. That was a really great overview and I think detail of how Jack sees this EQIP funding coming together. One thing that I think always strikes me about cost share programs like EQIP, Jack mentioned outcomes, right? The cost share itself is only going to last for so long, and the farm really should be building towards a more profitable long-term strategy on their operations. So these programs are intended to help you start adopting practices that really make your farm more profitable and more functional in the long term. And one of the things that I think is really important to consider is establishing a plan is the first and most important thing that you can do, right, for nutrient management. The second most important thing that you can do is knowing when to change that plan in season. Jack mentioned practices. We feel like one of the practices that has to be adopted on a farm for nitrogen specifically is in-season application. This is critical to making sure that those nutrients are in the soil where they need to be when the plant needs them, right? And further, you need to, if you are going to be making those decisions in season, there's plenty of data that is available to help you make a better decision. And the farther you can push that application back, the more certainty you're going to have that the application you're making is satisfying your crops. All that starts with a plan, and then the audible is what's really, really critical to getting the final outcome that is going to be most profitable on your farm. So I think that's a really, really critical thing there to consider. Again, outcomes and plans and how they interact.
Amazing. That was so good. All right, so we're at 7 minutes for that first topic. That was incredible. Now, I have to give Jack Washburn the first take on this. He knows a little bit about this next topic, so I am going to yield the floor to him to discuss this kind of at length. And I know he's already kind of teed it up for himself a little bit. So, when you look at your solution, EQIP as a whole, maybe the announcement of last week, Jack Washburn, what do you think as far as these technology accelerators for nutrient management when it comes to the adoption and organization of regenerative practices? And I know you know a little bit about that, Jack. So I'll let you get wound up, and then I'll give Jackson the floor after that.
Definitely. So I view my job as making it as easy as possible for people to fill out these programs, and that means like when you think of the data that's needed to fill this out, it's a ton of data from a bunch of different sources. And in order to make that program or to make that plan, all of that data needs to come together. And if all of that data is living in different spots, and it's kind of disorganized in like exactly what happened, what actually happened on the farm, like Jackson was saying, like in season, how can you turn that into when you're writing this plan for the next season in order to access these funds. And so, yeah, making sure like the practices that are happening are shown in the data that you're keeping, so that when we're writing these plans, it makes it very easy and you don't have to scramble and ask a bunch of different people to grab all of this data for you. And you just have it when you need to write those plans. And ideally getting to a point, it's our goal to get to a point where these plans can be written for you if all of your data is living in one spot.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. I mean, like recording what you're doing during the season is such a critical aspect of this. I mean, I think we've all felt that pain of getting to the end of something and, wishing that we had documented what we had done throughout it. And so I think just establishing that cadence and rhythm of documenting things is really important. And I think it's also important to understand like why you're doing that. So, as Jack is saying, if you can demonstrate long-term success in building these key metrics that are looked at by EQIP and other programs to access these funds. Hopefully, eventually, we have the ability to use those as attributes in selling a crop too, and get those for a higher price, right? If that day ever comes, like that is a really important why. Tracking that information is also really important to just making good decisions during the growing season as well, right? Like you don't have to wait for these practices or decisions that you're making and the information that you're recording to impact you next year. They can go ahead and impact you in this year, because if you are tracking and you are observing what's happening after you make a decision and record that decision, there are things that you can do to go ahead and intervene and keep building and compounding more quickly on some of these metrics that you're targeting for better outcomes.
All right, Jack, I'll give you a chance to respond to Jackson on that because I think he brought up a really good point that I want to call out. I'm not Sam Gray. I'm not managing 2,000 acres like he is, but keeping track of change of practices over time is a real challenge. And I think it's something that's going to get brought up a lot more because part of transitioning to a new, if we want to call it sustainable, regenerative, conservation system, new practices, no matter what, part of that is looking in the rear view of what you were doing. So, Jack, I'm kind of teasing you up a little bit more, and I'll give Jackson some time to respond to that kind of thought too. So go ahead, Jack.
Definitely. One thing I'm hearing about more and more from lots and lots of people is increasing in-season testing. So like Jackson was saying, instead of doing things more pre-plant, making sure things are spread out throughout the season when your crop needs them. And Jackson really nails nitrogen management. And I think it's like the most important thing to be nailing in season. And I'm hearing from a bunch of other growers that looking at, their micronutrients in season through like foliar applications, looking at, not just am I applying phosphorus in, through a fertilizer, but maybe I have enough phosphorus in my soil, but my phosphorus in my soil is not available or mobile. So maybe I'm looking at things like a Haney test or a soil health test to measure how good my soil biological engine is at mobilizing that phosphorus. And then in season, looking at things like tissue tests and plant sap tests to figure out, did it work? Maybe I'm using an alternative fertilizer, like a biological. Did I succeed in my goal of getting that phosphorus up into the plant tissue? And so that's kind of what we're looking at, especially with these EQIP plans, is rather than, maybe you take a soil test and your phosphorus level is very high, but that every single season you're applying P at the same rate. And maybe you're looking at doing some kind of management change where you're looking at an alternative fertilizer, tracking to see if that worked by doing in-season nutrient testing to see if I'm decreasing my phosphorus being applied, but I'm maybe switching to a biological amendment that's increasing my phosphorus solubilization, increasing my uptake of my other nutrients. Am I seeing a response? Not just waiting on yield, but looking at plant sap analysis to see in season, is it being taken up so we can make those tweaks, like Jackson was saying, in season.
All right, Jackson, you got about a minute to respond.
Measure and manage is what I'm hearing, right? Like Jack is all over measure and manage. You've got to measure what practice changes are doing, how they're impacting you. phosphorus, potassium, all these are affected by regenerative practices. One of the biggest things that we hear with our current customers is if they are starting to incorporate manure back into their systems, right, or they are starting to bring in cover crops, or they're making a tillage change, they are very aware that this is going to change how their crops are responding to nitrogen in season specifically, because that's what we focus on the most. And what they want is a better understanding of what's going on, reducing their uncertainty and giving them more confidence in making those practice changes. One of the biggest resistances that we see to folks adopting cover crops is, how is this going to short my crop on nitrogen, and do I know how to handle that early in the growing season without data on my particular soils and in my particular context? And that's where we think, again, recording what you're doing and really measuring in real time and managing in real time to how those conditions are changing can be a game changer for folks that are adopting regenerative practices and giving them the confidence to do so.
That was excellent topic. We're under 7 minutes. That was great. 6 minutes, 40 seconds. Now we're moving on to this next topic because uh, I think Jack and Jackson have both kind of teed up this conversation, and this is definitely a CHONEX conversation. And I'm going to give Sam some blanket time to jump on this conversation after we get done with the next two topics. But this topic is about alternative product decision support and evaluation. And so I'm going to give Jackson Stansell the floor on this. Obviously he's in the satellite imagery game, so there's lots of kind of, well, don't tell me what it is, tell me what to look for conversations around this, right? So Jackson, how do you see this alternative product decision support and evaluation conversation for y'all?
So alternative inputs are massive right now, from farmers that are wanting to separate from the nitrogen supply chain that is totally winning right now in terms of price levels for nitrogen fertilizer manufacturers, or for farmers that are just simply trying to give themselves more functional soils, right? And using products that give them more functional soils. There's a lot of interest in these alternative inputs. Um, and one of the biggest and most surprising use cases that we have found for our technology since we were founded back in 2021 is farmers leveraging our technology to see how well an alternative input is performing during the growing season without having to wait until yield comes in and they learn either a great or a disappointing story at the end of the season, right? And the great thing about data is that we have the ability to intervene and manage without having to put all that yield risk on the line at the end of the season. So I think it's really important when you're considering, alternative inputs. How do you pair that with management strategies and plan that prepares you to manage your risk as well as possible, and ultimately give you the biggest upside. Because what we also see is there are some farmers that don't trust an alternative input that is doing a great job on their farm, and they just can't seem to convince themselves to hold off on that additional application or that additional 40 pounds of nitrogen, right? The reality is, in a lot of cases, you can, and you just need the data to convince yourself to do that. And that's going to give you the most profit potential with those alternative inputs. So I think those are some initial thoughts I have on that alternative input conversation.
Definitely. I think that's perfect. So something I'm seeing with alternative inputs and hearing from Michael, who's an alternative input advisor, is different alternative inputs do different things. And knowing what your goal is with an alternative input is the most important thing that you can do in these decisions. And so knowing, are you trying to mobilize the phosphorus that's already existing in your soil with this alternative input, or are you trying to feed an existing microbial population? Like, what is your goal? And then knowing that goal from whatever your bottleneck is that you can see through your data, and then you're attacking that bottleneck with an alternative input rather than saying, this alternative input is going to boost my yield. You say, I'm going to tackle this specific bottleneck with this alternative input, and then you measure it, and did that change happen? And if you can eliminate as many of those bottlenecks as possible, then that yield's going to go up with a decreased reliance on the nitrogen supply chain, the other stuff, and create a more biologically active soil.
It's awesome. Jackson, I'll let you if you have any more thoughts, and then I'll just kind of give a kind of a brief update on some of that.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I'm excited to hear that. The thing that caught my attention there with what Jack was saying is just the building blocks of yield, right? He's talking about finding your bottleneck. What is your yield limiting factor? And I think a lot of us that are on this webinar understand that building more functional soils is absolutely critical to giving, crops the best resilience that they can have, to really enabling higher yield potentials in the field. It's really, really critical, and something we talk about with nitrogen management all the time is, what are the crop milestones and what are the actual processes that go into building yield at the end of the season, right? There are certain things that we need to do, such as building biomass in the crop, making sure that we're not putting too much nitrate into the plant too early on, right? So that we're actually able to have effective utilization of nitrogen in the crop, making sure that we are remobilizing effectively at the end of the year so that we're not having excess or luxury consumption at the end of the year, right? All of these are processes that eventually stack into yield at the end of the year. And just like a college football team, I mean, I'm an Alabama fan, sorry for anybody who's not, but you hear Nick Saban, talk about we're not going to go focus on the championship, we're going to go focus on the process, right? And I think it's kind of the same thing here with building yield, is you got to focus on the processes that go into building yield at the end of the year, more so than just focusing on only that outcome. And I think that's something that Jack hit on really well right there.
That was an awesome metaphor, Jackson.
Yeah, that was, you know, it's so funny to me, just so everyone knows, I have a background in biostimulant validation, verification, manufacturing, and quality control processes. And I just want to give a shout out to the Fertilizer Institute, who's really been kind of the flag bearer, if you will, the torchbearer on this conversation in the US. They've done a fantastic job, biostimulants and alternative inputs that do something, whether it's in the soil or in the plant. They've been around for a long time. They've been around in the US for probably, commercially available for almost 50 years at this point in a bigger scale kind of fashion. And, even though lots of growers have believed in these, even retailers have adopted these into their catalogs, there's still skeptical people that do not think some of these alternative inputs have any merit. And part of this merit-based conversation is really saying, how do you validate what they do? And usually a lot of these alternative inputs and it parlays perfect with what Jackson sees in the field. Part of it is abiotic stress tolerance, and the other part is nutrient use efficiency. And, if we're talking nutrient use efficiency, there's mobility conversations that Jack at Cultra can monitor through SAP. He can trigger some of these things to say, oh, yes, that's working, or maybe it's lagging, or maybe there's a bottleneck. What is that bottleneck? And so I wanted to give a shout out because these methodologies that are actually going to be in this international standard within the next 2 years for really voting and kind of science-based meritocracy, a lot of them have just been drafted. And a lot of that's because of the European Biostimulant Council. I want to give a tremendous shout out to them. A lot of these are European companies originally, but there are US based companies too. And the Fertilizer Institute has been a tremendous voice for this industry and bringing science to the forefront around what these alternative inputs do. So that's that conversation. And so this last one is Hot Take Central. And I'm gonna let Jack Washburn take this one a little bit because a central part of a lot of these nutrient management plans, just by way of certain universities, a lot of them are prescriptive plans on nutrient managements. And what does that mean? That means if you want X amount of yield, sometimes you will apply X amount of nutrients. And this is the yield goal conversation. So my thought is yield goals, are they facts? Are they fiction? Are they somewhere in the middle? So Jack, what's your take on that?
As someone much older than me, much wiser than me said, there's no magic that happens across state lines. And so if you got two land grant universities with two different prescriptions for the same yield goal, 1 mile apart, something's whack in the science. Um, and so I think I think we're gonna lead away from that in the future. But I think my biggest hot take is everybody's arguing about tests, like what test is correct. And I think that's the wrong way to go about it. I think each test is a different piece of a puzzle, and you got to put all the puzzle pieces together. So people are saying, chemical soil tests like a nutrient digestion versus, Haney test versus, all these different things like PLFA tests and all that. It's like I view it, yeah, chemical soil tests as your savings account. What's present in the soil. You got maybe a weaker acid test, saturated paste test, something like that. That's like what's more available, what's in your checking account. And then you got the truth, what's actually getting into the crop. And that's with things like plant sap analysis. In the industry, though, plant sap analysis is you have target ranges, you have ideal levels where those nutrients need to be, and those nutrients need to be in specific spots for specific crops at specific times, right? So what Jackson was saying earlier with that nitrate management and preventing, over application of nitrate getting into your plants early in the season, we're seeing correlations between excess nitrate levels, luxury consumption, and pest pressure. And so if we can use things like Jackson's technology to increase nitrogen use efficiency, maybe we can decrease our pesticide costs, and things like that. And if we're able to turn those nitrates into functional proteins in the plant by decreasing those excess nitrates and balancing our micronutrients and other nutrients, then we can maximize yield. And I think the goal is to maximize yield rather than try to hit a yield goal based off prescriptions from a land grant university. That's my hot take. I don't know if it's that hot.
I think it is, and I like it. I mean, honestly, I hate yield goals. I think there is a little bit of merit to them in the sense that it gives you just a general expectation range, right, to be in. But the thing that I hate about a yield goal is number one, you're kind of limiting yourself in some ways, right? I've seen many cases where a farmer goes into a season with a 240 bushel an acre yield goal and gets up to 285 bushels an acre. And it's like, well, how did that happen? My yield goal, I only fertilized to 240 bushels an acre. How does that happen? Right. And the reason for that is really what we should be talking about is yield potential, because yield potential is the convergence of all of the environmental management and genetic factors that go into determining what that crop can do in that given year. How many times do you plant the same hybrid on the same date at the same time with the same rainfall right afterwards and get off to the same start to the season, much less accumulate GDDs the exact same way, have pests hit at exactly the same time, apply your herbicide at exactly the same time? And the answer is never. I mean, you're never able to replicate the same season over and over again. And the idea behind a yield goal is that you essentially can do that, or you're only going to build to that certain yield goal and just try to replicate that year over year. The reality is if you try to do that, you're artificially limiting yourself in some cases, but you're also not playing to the conditions that you've been given in certain years if something doesn't go exactly according to plan. So I think that's a really big challenge. And I see a lot of issues with this, as Jack mentioned, with how universities honestly are using yield goals within nitrogen algorithms. We did a lot of our work in the state of Nebraska with the UNL algorithm, which is a yield goal based algorithm that starts with 1.2 times yield goal to get to your starting nitrogen amount, and then you just subtract off nitrogen credits from there. Well, the challenge that we heard from a lot of farmers is, how do I know how much credit to give my irrigation water when I don't even know how much I'm going to irrigate during the year at the beginning of the season? How much do I credit for organic matter if I don't actually know the biological function of my soil? Do I know that I'm getting 45 pounds of nitrogen from my soybean crop that I grew last year? What about cover crops? What about manure, right? You just stack on all these uncertainties to this yield goal based methodology. So I think that's a huge concern. And that's part of why the state of Nebraska has now officially moved from their recommendation being the UNL nitrogen algorithm to being sensor based nitrogen management in season. That is now their statewide recommendation because it needs to be adaptive, right, to what we're actually seeing for conditions in the year. And it's important too, because of what Jack said there, all this stuff interacts with pest pressure, with disease pressure. Our director of agronomy in Iowa had a trial this year showing different nitrogen rates and pulling leaves that show different disease pressure, right? And the disease pressure was kind of at the optimal, so to speak. It was the least at the zero nitrogen rate. But if you looked at the intersection between nitrogen and disease, it was best at about 120 pounds of nitrogen per acre, right? Because limiting nitrogen was able to help that plant build disease resistance while also getting that crop to a good biomass. And so I think, as Jack is alluding to there's so many things that are working together in this system that if you just operate with the yield goal in mind and don't adapt to the potential in that growing season, you're never going to achieve the optimal outcome.
Jack Washburn, I'll give you a chance to jump back in there.
I mean, I agree with everything Jackson's saying, and yeah, I mean, I think looking at that nitrogen excess nitrate levels and kind of looking at things from a yield goal perspective misses the broader picture of a lot of other things that are all interconnected. And just remembering that we're land stewards of a very interconnected ecosystem is just central to what we always need to keep top of mind instead of following things from a prescription or an algorithm.
Yeah, we're a long way from a stalk nitrate test, let me tell you. Yeah. Anyways, we got Sam Gray on this call, and he is, he's a champion for CHONEX, but also he's a great farmer. He's got a great diverse operation, and so I was going to yield to Sam for a couple minutes. We've covered these topics, Sam, but Sam, I wanted to kind of, from a grower perspective, and looking at, EQIP and nutrient management and kind of organizing your thoughts. How do you view technology accelerators like Jack and Jackson's companies into what you're doing as a farmer?
Yeah. And I was actually going to ask them a similar question, and it was around your the best use of your product, or how do you make decisions whether it's on new inputs or a new technology. And my whole thing, whether it's on our specialty crops being blueberries and oranges, or if it's in row crops, you got to look at two things. Like, is this gonna save costs, or is this gonna achieve revenue, or increase revenue? And you can do those things in a lot of different ways. And like with CHONEX, like when farmers ask, like, what is this going to do for you, or when we were making a decision on our farm on whether to use it or not, I think we're getting closer to StrongSoil and CHONEX can reduce your costs either through, nitrogen use efficiency, or we're getting closer to, you can reduce certain sprays, like that for pathogens, or this is an alternative to something that's more expensive. Or you can look at, okay, on our 450 different row crops, or 450 different trials, we're showing, yield increases, and for XYZ reasons on this crop, at this application time, we think we can boost your yields, which is going to lead to a revenue increase and a return on investment. And that's basically how I look at everything. So now I'm going to flip it to you two. When you're talking to farmers, and in specialty crops like blueberries, in our sales process, it's easier for me right now because these guys are making money in most all geographies. But like talking to a corn and cotton grower, how do y'all convince these guys, or what is your sales process for, this is why I want you to try our technology? And do you view it as like a cost saving, a time saving, or is it a revenue booster? And kind of a part of that question, are you replacing work that they're already doing, or are you enhancing it, and making it easier for them to make insights or decisions to decrease cost or increase revenue? Either y'all, whoever wants to go first, Jack or Jackson.
I can go first. First, for Cultra, speaking for Cultra, right now we're not in a position where we're going directly to growers. We're going to the crop consultants. And so I'm seeing this trend in the industry where there's fewer and fewer straight retailers like nutrient ag people. And it's more and more independent crop consultants that are using a diverse approach. And they're starting to think, I'm going to pull different tools from different toolboxes. And I need a way to analyze all of this new data. I'm talking to agronomists that are doing, up to weekly plant sap analysis. And they're saying this is an insane amount of data if I'm going to make any decisions based off of it. And right now, listen to a lot of them, they're saying they're like hand typing into Excel or Power BI or something like that to track everything. And so that was like the main reason why we built this tool. And when we're talking to them, it's a time saving. It's how do I take data in and turn it into a recommendation in a tenth of the amount of time. And that's kind of our value prop right now.
On our side, I would say it's fairly similar. We're in a similar boat in the sense that we are going through crop consultants, the agronomists that are serving farms. We think that's really important because you need to have local support when implementing this technology. And frankly, our team would be stretched way too thin, right, to be able to give you good results and provide the kind of support that you need if we didn't do that. So we're in a very similar situation. We also see that in those cases, we are more enhancing the work that's being done and saving time and labor, right, by providing and honestly providing a more high frequency look at fields than what they otherwise might get, right? If we're able to provide near daily satellite images, you're getting down to a really, really, really high temporal resolution look at how your fields are performing for nitrogen without having to put boots in that field every single day, without having to process all of that information yourself. So very similar on that front. On the conversation with farmers, right? Because that is an absolutely huge conversation, and we still are in that conversation with the crop consultants that we work with. It really boils down to one question that needs to get answered. It's how certain are you that nitrogen is your yield limiting factor? Our technology is really good at isolating whether or not nitrogen is actually your yield limiting factor. In the cases where it is not your yield limiting factor, we're a cost saving technology, because what we are often going to tell you is you do not need to put more nitrogen on your crop because it is not benefiting you. You're either short on another nutrient, you have a non-functional soil, there's something going on that is preventing you from utilizing that nitrogen, so you do not need to have it all out there. In the cases where we are saying that nitrogen is your yield limiting factor, that is where we are a revenue increasing technology. What we often see is in those cases, those farmers have already adopted practices that are building their soil function. They're doing a great job of getting micronutrients out in the field to build that yield producing engine in the field. And in those cases, you can benefit from having more nitrogen or from using a product that is going to allow your crops to utilize more of the nitrogen that is out there in your field. So in that case, we are more of a revenue producing technology. And that's why when we talk about our technology broadly, we talk about profitability, because profit is a combination of revenue and costs. So ultimately, profitability is what we're trying to drive, but which element of that we pull the lever on a little bit more depends on the condition that we're operating in.
Thank you for that, Jack and Jackson. Thank you, Sam. We do have Gary Black on this call. Gary knows a thing or two about local support. I know Jackson mentioned local support and, being involved with agronomists, being involved with USDA, NRCS offices. I want to tee you up a little bit, Gary, if you could drop a couple of minutes for us of knowledge on kind of this topic and some data maintenance kind of points.
Well, thank you, Michael. Welcome, everybody, and we're going to thank CHONEX and Sentinel for the opportunity to work with you. Back to the earlier connectivity here with EQIP and really where this fits. Number one, we saw EQIP 590 as a great opportunity to introduce Cultra's products and Sentinel's products and CHONEX products because they meet the requirements of several practices within EQIP. And that's really good. And we've been meeting with them, with NRCS officials on an ongoing basis, really for 6 months, to try to figure out where was the lane. And obviously, farmers need support. Farmers are looking for resources, but it would be good to be able to use these resources to introduce these new technologies. So there's a perfect match there. But there's a however coming that I wanted to point out to everybody. This is great. The NRCS announcement of this 700 million and all this wonderful things that are going to happen last week. And I'm reading, for producers, this means bundled practices will be integrated into a single application, making programs easier to access and more impactful. Yeah, I filling out one thing, I get it, but the thoughts, when you go 4 points below that in the agency statement, it says outcomes are tracked, measured, and credited back to the farmer. The bottom line is this all ain't going to happen without more work. There's going to be more required. So this is not one-stop shop and y'all just come in and everything's going to be okay. No, for the EQIP 590 and other practices of the future for this regen notion, it's going to be more work. Therefore, you're going to have to work smarter, and the best way to do it is through the technology that's been discussed today. That's one of the things we're offering too, and we're trying to figure out. I'm not going to bore y'all with more of NRCS's news release. I love them. We met with them yesterday for an hour. Michael and I did. We meet with the Undersecretary, Richard Fordyce, on Thursday morning to try to figure out in 30 minutes more what he's willing to tell us if there's anything. But they got a news release right now. I don't think they have nothing else. And we'll figure out, but we're going to figure it out. And that's going to hopefully benefit the discussion, the advancement of the technology that we've discussed today. And that's kind of what our role will be moving forward. But it's great. It's a great time to be in with these three technologies today. It's a perfect place at a perfect time. And for those of you who are who have joined us on this call, there's some mighty good people to work with, and we look forward to seeing this thing mature in the coming weeks.
Okay, Jackson, do y'all have any closing remarks?
One of the things I want to hit on is something that Jack brought up earlier, which I think was really, really important, which is target ranges by growth stages within crops. I think that does not get hit on quite enough. And I think, honestly, one of the biggest gaps that we don't talk about with any form of sensing or measurement on crops right now is how hybrid or variety specific are those measurements. I think that we, as a whole and as an industry, have a long way to go in terms of getting down to how do different hybrids respond to nitrogen or phosphorus or potassium in specific ways. And I'm talking about corn there, obviously. I think the same is going to be true for cotton, and we know it's true in potatoes, right? Like every single variety is different. Something that we've seen is that non-GMO corn tends to have much higher nitrogen concentrations in the leaf tissue, at least in our experience, than GMO corn does. Don't know why, but if you put them on the same lab test, they'll come in different ranges, right? And so I think we've got a long way to go in terms of correcting for that. That's something that we're working on at Sentinel quite a bit, is how do you calibrate to those individual needs? Because that's another element of this whole yield potential conversation. But I think that's something that you really need to be paying attention to if you're using data to drive your decisions.
Yeah, I think Jackson hit the nail on the head with the biggest thing we can look at right now, which is if we're taking all this data, you have where it is and where it should be, and where it should be, we don't know. And that's hard. And it's a really large, difficult data management problem because you have one indicator on multiple different tests, multiple different times, on multiple different crops that you have to keep track of. And my CTO, when I told him we needed to do allow for all of the crop consultants to put in their own target ranges based on GDD per crop to follow it on a line and show if it's too high or too low. That was like a nightmare, but we figured it out. And now it's like we can do it. We just need a ton of data in order to figure out where those nutrient ideal levels are. And so doing things like keeping track of your GDDs and knowing what growth stage requires what concentration of what nutrient, and writing in-season plans with things like Jackson's Sentinel product and that tech and stuff like that, I think is the most important way that we can reach yield potential, and being able to correlate yield with those target ranges for all of our nutrients.
That was absolutely great. Sam, you got anything else?
No, that was it. I think we're like 1 minute till time. So yeah, just thank y'all, Jack and Jackson, for joining and telling us everything about your product. And everyone listening, you can see the slide now if you want to reach out. I think they'd love to talk to you about their technology and how they can get involved on your farm or in your crop consultancy group. So thank y'all.
Jack and Jackson, thank y'all so much. Sam, thank you. Thank you, CHONEX, for hosting, and excited to bring you more information like this in the future. And y'all have a great day.